Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing to deliver the cost of living relief that families need. Saskatchewan people are struggling more than anywhere else in Canada just to pay their bills. But this Premier has done nothing to help families with the cost of living. Instead, we've seen them add taxes and fees, making life more expensive for families. When will the Premier deliver the cost of living relief that Saskatchewan people need?
Here. Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, I rise in my place each and every day and talk about the $2 billion that are in each and every budget, Mr. Speaker, and I suspect those $2 billion are there for affordability measures for Saskatchewan families, removing 112,000 people off the tax rolls altogether, low-income people, many of them, Mr. Speaker, low-income families, Mr. Speaker, and I suspect in just a few short minutes you're going to see the reaffirmation of all of those programs, Mr. Speaker, as well as additional efforts to ensure that in this province we remain, our communities, our families that are living here remains as one of the most affordable places in the nation of Canada to live, Mr. Speaker. Something that would help that today is happening in our federal parliament, Mr. Speaker. I would say that there's a motion on the floor to remove the carbon tax across Canada, one of the largest inflationary pressures that Saskatchewan and Canadian families are facing, Mr. Speaker. And I would ask the members opposite, are they contacting their NDP leader, Mr. Speaker? And is the NDP federally, are they going to vote for Canadian jobs, Mr. Speaker, or are they going to vote for Justin Trudeau's job?
Yeah. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier knows very, very well that we oppose that federal carbon tax, and you know what? I thank him for the opportunity to say it here again on the floor of this Assembly. Right. But, Mr. Speaker, it is so clear that this tired and out-of-touch government isn't listening to the people of Saskatchewan. Right. Too many families in this province are forced to choose between rent or buying groceries. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the Premier understands this isn't an academic exercise. This is about survival for families in this province. And we've called on this Premier. We've called time and time again to scrap their fuel tax, like the Premiers of Alberta and like the Premier of Manitoba have, Mr. Speaker. But why is this Premier continuing to deny families in this province the relief that they need?
Recognize the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would ask the member opposite, why would she want to remove $500 million from the highways budget? Mr. Speaker, the highways budget that is making our highways safe across the province, Mr. Speaker, in an area, in a jurisdiction where Saskatchewan families already pay less income tax in both of the jurisdictions that she has mentioned, Mr. Speaker. Over $2 billion in affordability measures, Mr. Speaker, which I would say again today are making Saskatchewan one of the most affordable places to live in the nation of Canada. The second lowest utility bundle in Canada, it's right here in a Saskatchewan community, Mr. Speaker. Tax changes that have brought 112,000 people, many of them low-income families, entirely off the provincial tax rolls. When she cuts her gas tax, Mr. Speaker, is she going to return some of those 112,000 low-income families back to paying Saskatchewan income tax, Mr. Speaker? Because the money does ultimately have to come from somewhere, Mr. Speaker. Today, there is an opportunity for us in this House to agree and to phone any federal counterparts we have and say, let's support Canadians. Let's remove the inflationary carbon tax from all Canadians, the consumption carbon tax, Mr. Speaker, which is driving inflation up across this country. Have all federal leaders support the opposition, Mr. Speaker, Pierre Poilievre, in his motion removing that consumption-based carbon tax, Mr. Speaker. Will the members opposite side with all Canadians in having a more affordable lifestyle, Mr. Speaker, and support all Canadians' jobs, or are they going to support Justin Trudeau with his lifestyle and his job, Mr. Speaker?
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Tell you what, Mr. Speaker, we can go into the Premier's office and make the phone call together, because I will stand up and say the same thing in every room, Mr. Speaker. But what is really clear here, Mr. Speaker, that government doesn't understand the breaking point that Saskatchewan families are at. People need cost of living relief, not just more lines from that government. And day after day, we've stood in this Assembly calling on that government to offer some relief to the people of this province. But day after day, that Premier stands up and spins lines and says no. My question, why hasn't the Premier offered the relief that Saskatchewan people so desperately need?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, in Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan families are going to start paying income tax at $26,150. Over $20,000 more than that is when, Mr. Speaker, sorry, that's in Manitoba. In Saskatchewan, you'll earn another $20,000 before you start paying income tax. That's one of the ways that we have been able to remove 112,000 families, Saskatchewan families, from paying any provincial income tax whatsoever, Mr. Speaker. With respect to what's happening in the federal House, our communication has been sent to the Leader of the Opposition. We support removing the consumption carbon tax. We support removing the carbon tax on everything for everyone, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the Leader of the Opposition, is she going to make that call? Is she going to support Canadian jobs, or is she going to support her leader in supporting Justin Trudeau?
Yeah. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I thought we had a better hearing plan than that, but the answer is yes, and I already have. But, Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government clearly has a listening problem, and they're failing families in this province. They're also failing families, Mr. Speaker, and teachers and students. That's why we have teachers, thousands of them, outside the legislature today, because this Premier and his failing education minister refused to bargain in good faith with teachers. Now, the Premier should have gotten a deal with teachers long ago, one that actually addresses class size and complexity, a problem that they created, by the way, Mr. Speaker. But he failed. This dispute has gone on long enough. Will they send this issue to arbitration and get teachers and students back in the classroom?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Premier.
This government has been making every effort to find points of collaboration, Mr. Speaker, to find opportunities to ensure that our children are in the classroom, Mr. Speaker. The STF union has asked for annualized increased funding to our classroom supports, Mr. Speaker. That's been provided, and we've signed an MOU with school divisions to ensure that that's the base moving forward for the next 4 years, Mr. Speaker. We have there was a 23% wage increase that was demanded by the STF union, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to be able to meet that in a jurisdiction where we already invest more than per capita than any other jurisdiction or province in the nation of Canada, Mr. Speaker, but they asked for the mirroring of the MLA salary increases, Mr. Speaker. We've provided that. They asked for control over their health benefits plan, Mr. Speaker. We've offered that. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we have said yes many times. The STF union has not said yes. We would ask them to say yes, and we would ask parents to reach out to the union, Mr. Speaker, and ask the union to return to the bargaining table, ask them to say yes to that. Let's find a good deal for teachers, a good deal for Saskatchewan taxpayers. Let's get our teachers back in the classroom, Mr. Speaker, and let's let the kids play.
I recognize the member from Saskatchewan Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This tired and out-of-touch government needs to get a deal done with Saskatchewan teachers so our students can get back to the classroom. Saskatchewan families need that deal done now. This has gone on long enough, and teachers have been crystal clear. This job action would end immediately if this government would agree to send the issue of class size and complexity to a fair and independent process of binding arbitration. Teachers, parents, and students, they deserve that fair process, and they deserve a deal. It's time for that Minister of Education to get out of the way. Why won't the Minister of Education do that today and send this dispute to fair and independent binding arbitration?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would remind the member opposite, and you as well, Mr. Speaker, that exactly what the Premier just outlined. Several items where the government has moved in order to get a deal done that's going to work for teachers in this province, taxpayers, and students and families, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I should remind the member opposite that any sanctions are the choice of the STF leadership and the STF leadership alone. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity today to talk with athletes from the northeast area of our province, Mr. Speaker, from Priestville, from Sturgis, from North Quay, Mr. Speaker. These students should be finishing up their classes for the day and getting ready for hoopla in one of their last practices of the week. But instead, the STF leadership has decided to target this tournament and other extracurricular activities, Mr. Speaker, and now those kids who should be on the court are here today at the legislature, Mr. Speaker. It's time to let the kids play.
Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, if that minister thinks that his offer to teachers is fair, if he believes the words he just spoke in the Assembly are actually correct, then he should have no problem proving it. That's right. He should have no problem sending his offer to binding arbitration to get a binding decision. But the minister won't do it. He won't do it. He would rather see this job action go on and on and on while everyone else pays the price. Right. Mr. Speaker, there is one person in this province with the power to end this dispute once and for all, and it's that failing Minister of Education. When will he recognize that he's the problem? It's time for him to get out of the way, send this dispute to a fair and independent process to get a fair deal for Saskatchewan teachers, Saskatchewan students, and Saskatchewan families.
Sure. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I would remind the member opposite that, again, as the Premier outlined earlier, this province already invests more per capita into K-12 education than any other province in Canada, Mr. Speaker, and has been for multiple years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in just a few minutes, we're going to have this 2024-2025 provincial budget released, Mr. Speaker, and is going to see an additional investment into K-12 education in this province to ensure that supports can be offered to our students by our teachers across the province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, binding arbitration is not an option because the STF have only been at the bargaining table for 30 minutes in the last 5 months. That's not acceptable, Mr. Speaker. People of this province deserve better. The teachers of the Federation deserve better, Mr. Speaker. Yep. There's only one person standing in the way of hoopla going on this weekend, and that's the STF president.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it almost seems like he still thinks he's the Minister of Highways and can't change direction, but he can, and this government needs to get a deal done with teachers. And they need to come clean on the way they're wasting public money on hotels connected to this Sask Party government. Last year, I asked the Sask Party for basic information about why the minister paid 50% more once the Ministry of Social Services was picking up the tab. $200 a night at the Sunrise Motel, Mr. Speaker. It took months to get an answer from that minister. He ran the clock, and now I can see why. The documents show that minister is paying inflated rates to not one, but two hotels connected to that minister's office mate, the Sask Party member from Regina Northeast. When did the Minister of Social Services learn there were actually two hotels connected to Sask Party MLAs in the Sunrise scandal? Here, here.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, answered many questions on this, Mr. Speaker, gave the information to that member, extensive amount of information. The ministry worked very hard to tabulate that over many years and many different places where the procurement took place, Mr. Speaker. So we rely on those if there is an overuse of shelters and other providers, Mr. Speaker. We look to provide that in emergency situations for those who are vulnerable in our communities, Mr. Speaker. That's been the same process that has been used by the NDP when they were in government, Mr. Speaker. What I've committed to do is change the NDP policy. We're working on an RFP proposal, Mr. Speaker, and we're working on ensuring that there are quotes going forward for frontline emergency workers. We want to ensure that there is a place to stay for vulnerable people, but we also want to try and get the best rate as well.
Here, here. Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the question was actually when he learned there were two hotels connected to his government. Right. Mr. Speaker, when these numbers first came to light in February, that minister said there weren't any other hotels connected to government MLAs. We know now That's not true. The conflict of interest filings for the member from Regina Northeast show he's an investor at the Thrift Lodge Motel. It's a source of income. Did the minister really not know that the Thrift Lodge is connected to a Sask Party MLA? Was he running interference for the member that he shares a constituency office with? Or does he really know so little about his own file?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, we rely on ministry caseworkers as well as third-party providers, mobile crisis services for frontline emergency services that are available out there, Mr. Speaker. One of those is hotels when it is needed. Those caseworkers do great work in our communities to ensure vulnerable people are looked after. They're the ones that decide what hotels may be available on any given night, Mr. Speaker, and then that is the process that takes place. However, Mr. Speaker, we want to strengthen those policies to ensure that we're getting the best deal for taxpayers, but also at the end of the day, at the bottom line, we want to ensure individuals who are in a difficult situation, whether it be fleeing domestic violence or having a challenging time when it's minus 30 out, for example, Mr. Speaker, that's got to be at the front of any decision made.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it gets worse. Of all hotels, that minister paid the two most inflated rates at the two hotels connected to his office mate, the Sask Party MLA for Regina Northeast. It's right there in their own documents. That minister paid an average of $162 per night. That's 64% what the Sunrise Motel usually charges, a hotel owned by the member from Regina Northeast. The minister paid an average of $185 a night to the Thrift Lodge, which is an increase of almost 106%. Surely that's not the best deal for taxpayers, Mr. Speaker. Why is the Minister of Social Services comfortable with paying 106% more to a hotel connected to his constituency office mate?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Speaker, the member opposite is talking about the old NDP policies. We are strengthening our policies going forward, Mr. Speaker. So what we're doing, we want to secure a block of rooms both in Regina and Saskatoon, do an RFP for that, Mr. Speaker, as well as have a look at paying damage deposits. That was the policy, to not pay damage deposits. We hope this will increase the amount of hotels available that are willing to take on clients that are often difficult and difficult to house, Mr. Speaker, so we want to do that. But we also want to ensure there's 3 quotes on a regular basis going forward, and to help guide caseworkers and those on the front lines to be able to make those difficult decisions, often late at night in emergency situations, to have that number to be able to get the best rate possible. Of course, Mr. Speaker, there are other circumstances around that. We want to ensure that at the bottom line, we want to make sure that individuals who are in a very difficult situation, the member opposite has advocated for hotel use for her constituents, Mr. Speaker. Yep. We want to make sure.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Interesting thing, Mr. Speaker, the Sunrise Motel only received $282 in the 2018 fiscal year from the Ministry of Social Services before the member for Regina Northeast was elected. It wasn't until after his election and after the appointment of the now Social Services Minister to that role, who also happens to share a constituency office with the member, that the annual payouts to the Sunrise Motel jumped suddenly to closer to $220,000 per year. Since its owner's election in 2020, the Sunrise has now received over $368,000. How does the Minister of Social Services explain this massive increase in payments to his office mate's hotel? What changed? The election? He assumed the role of social services? What changed?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Speaker, again, I've answered this question many times before. We're going to ensure our policies are clear, and we want to change them, as I just noted in my previous answer. I also wanted to tell the public that we're working with the auditor as well. The member called for the auditor to come in. We've asked the auditor to come, and ministry officials are working closely with her and her office to ensure that procurement is done, and we want to ensure, again, we have the best deal for the taxpayer, but at the same time, make sure individuals in difficult situations have a roof over their heads, Mr. Speaker. That's the most important thing here. We have to remember, Mr. Speaker, we see over and over again, Mr. Speaker, the NDP put politics before people.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the auditor is looking into this. It was too bad that they voted down our motion that would see the results of that audit come out before the election. Mr. Speaker, the minister has claimed he's come clean about everything, and Saskatchewan people deserve to know the truth when it comes to the money this government is wasting on motels connected to the Sask Party MLAs. I wrote to the minister more than a month ago, Mr. Speaker, asking for more answers about public money spent at the Thrift Lodge Motel, the other hotel connected to the member from Regina Northeast. Still no answer, Mr. Speaker. So I'll ask the minister what I asked in my letter. How much public money has he paid out to the Thrift Lodge Motel each year since 2018?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, we've been very transparent. As I said before, we got all the information. It was a significant amount of information. I want to thank the people in the public service that did extremely good and a large amount of work to get that information to the member. And so, if she has additional questions, we'll certainly bring that number forward, Mr. Speaker, very soon. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I think the bottom line here is we want to change policies. We've done that. The process is happening as we speak, Mr. Speaker, on the RFP side, as well as ensuring there is transparency around the quotes that are available for hotel usage when needed for individuals who are. Whatever the case may be, there may have been a fire in their apartment, Mr. Speaker. There may have been someone fleeing domestic violence. There may be someone who is just in a difficult situation, happen to be in the city. So, Mr. Speaker, that's our focus. Vulnerable.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, well over $500,000 has gone out to hotels connected to that member. That's 15% of the overall budget for all hotels within the province. The waste of public money is astounding, and it matters. It matters because Saskatchewan people work hard for their money. They want to see those dollars going to healthcare, to highways, to sustainable housing, not into Sask Party MLA bank accounts. And it matters because it is exactly how we got to where we are today, a tired and out-of-touch government that has added more debt than any other government in Saskatchewan history. It's no surprise that Premier has added more debt than we saw under Grant Devine himself. How does the Minister of Social Services justify wasting so much public money, knowing full well it'll be Saskatchewan people holding the bag?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Speaker, once again, I've answered several questions in this area. We've changed how we're going to attempt to procure hotels, Mr. Speaker. Occasionally we do need hotels when there's overflow in other service providers, which we've been able to increase with investments from this government in terms of homeless shelters, whatever it may be, only due to a strong growing economy are we able to afford that, Mr. Speaker. We're going to strengthen policy around this area, Mr. Speaker. The member, though, talks about wasting money, Mr. Speaker. I might question that. What is the maximum number that member would do to put a roof over somebody's head in an emergency situation, Mr. Speaker? That's what we're talking about here. Vulnerable people, Mr. Speaker. Again and again, we see the members opposite, the NDP, they're putting partisan politics above vulnerable people.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Saskatoon Centre.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since 2018, nearly 2,000 people have died from overdose in this province. 1,170 of those overdose deaths were First Nations or Métis people. Indigenous people are only 17% of Saskatchewan, but we were almost 60% of all overdoses. When will we see an evidence-based plan from this government that will stop the harm in Indigenous communities and save lives?
Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The message that we are sending to communities around Saskatchewan is that no illicit drugs are safe.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, that's why we are focused on getting people, all people in Saskatchewan, the treatment that they need to overcome addictions and live healthy lives in recovery. Mr. Speaker, we have introduced a plan that is expanding addictions treatment capacity across Saskatchewan. We're adding 500 addiction treatment spaces across Saskatchewan. We are making it easier for people to access those spaces, and we are wrapping supports around those individuals, Mr. Speaker, through a recovery-oriented system of care. We know, Mr. Speaker, that by helping people overcome their addictions and by supporting them through recovery, we can save lives, we can heal families, and we can strengthen our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.